and that was what sort of made me start to think about it, really, because we worked on what was called Cathedral Junction, and his idea there was to integrate the trams to buy a twin set, one of the old Fiat twin set rail cars, and refurbish it. So that would run between Littleton and Addington and link up to the trams. The buses would link up to the tram loop. Rather than be a tourist trap, it would be part of the transport system. And of course, once you get to Addington, you're then on the network. So, integration. He was a great thinker.
Well, an icon, wasn't he, of engineering thinking, John Britton. Let me ask you then, Barry, if regional rail came back as Sue Bradford would like it to be done, how would it be done finally?
Well, unless things can be quick, unless to put a train on like Tahuria, it's pretty sluggish. That's the trouble, and you really want to compete with cars in terms of time, but also in terms of comfort. And what you can't do in a car, of course, is look out at the scenery or do your work at your computer. Have Wi-Fi. You know what I mean? So the idea is, if you're going to do it, you should make it more attractive than a car.
Really, really interesting stuff, Barry. Thank you very, very much for your time on that. And I do encourage people to go and have a look at futurerailnz.com. Someone says here, there is a full solar electric railway in Brisbane. It's something that people love, don't they, Chris? The idea of rail, whether or not...
Oh, same. Yeah, but you talk about, it being sluggish. I remember, going between parents' places in school holidays from Taumaranui to Christchurch, and you went on 2 trains and a ferry, and it took 20 hours. Because at that stage, domestic air travel was cost prohibitive.
Slow travel.
Well, this would be a boon, to get the short-haul commuter stuff going, wouldn't it? I mean, we've got as I said, I live in Karaka, and I'm in a traffic jam most of my life.
Yeah, well, you're going back to Karaka after this, aren't you, Cindy?
So, it'll take me 2 hours.
Well, thanks for coming in, both of you. I really appreciate your time. Wonderful stuff. Chris Wikaina, Cindy Mitchener. Tomorrow, Power Ballad Friday. Turn it up loud for once. Lisa Owen with Checkpoint next. See you tomorrow.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere ake nei, radical is how Te Pāti Maōri describes its tax policy, and the National Party absolutely agrees. But one says it will help fight hunger and homelessness, while the other claims it's an economic wrecking ball. We'll have the details and you decide. An open home was held at a property at the centre of a homicide investigation after the disappearance of a real estate agent. Te Hui, a passenger train, gets the green light to return to Auckland Central following safety concerns. The rubbish recycling habit sending a whole lot of trash to the landfill. And the pie eaters putting their bodies on the line looking for the best in the country. You can watch us live on the RNZ website and Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Anna Thomas. Labour leader Chris Hipkins is not denying National's claims that his party will campaign on removing GST tax from fruit and vegetables. Labour is expected to announce details of its tax policy soon. National's deputy leader Nicola Willis says she understands it includes the removal of the 15% tax on fruit and vegetables. Mr Hipkins is not denying Ms Willis's claims.
I understand Nicola Willis has been purporting to announce Labour's tax policy. She's just going to have to wait and see what it is, the same as everybody else's. I'm not going to announce National's tax policy. They've had multiple tax policies in the time that we've been in government. They can announce their policy, we'll announce ours in due course.
Chris Hipkins denies he's losing control of his party's narrative. Te Pāti Maōri is proposing a series of wealth taxes if it forms part of the next government. The party's unveiled its election tax policy, which would introduce higher taxes on wealth, foreign companies, undeveloped land and vacant houses. It'll use the revenue to pay for its long-standing policy to take GST off food. Co-leader Debbie Ngāriwapaka says it would remove GST from all food, not just fruit and vegetables.
We have not, and we've refused to get into the debate on how and who should be dictating to families how they should eat. What has to be the focus is that they can eat.
Te Pāti Maōri would also introduce a tax-free zone for all income up to $30,000. A woman who lives near a Christchurch house at the centre of an investigation into Yanfei Bao's disappearance says there was an open home there last Sunday, days after police made a public appeal for help to find her. The Harcourt's real estate agent vanished last Wednesday morning and police are treating the case as a homicide inquiry. Neighbour Julie Charney says she saw a few people coming to view the house at an open home last Sunday.
I just seen people just going in and doing the usual business, going and having a look at the place, nothing out of the ordinary.
Julie Charney says police came to the house on Wednesday or Thursday last week, then returned on Sunday night before a full-scale forensic examination of their three-bedroom home. Police say they were investigating several possible lines of inquiry and certain locations became an interest as information came through. A forensic psychiatrist has told the High Court Lauren Dickerson was horrified by visions she'd had of harming her children the month before she killed them. Mrs Dickerson is on trial at the High Court in Christchurch for the murder of her 3 young daughters in their Timaru home in September 2021. She denies the charges, pleading insanity and infanticide. Dr Susan Hatters-Friedman spoke to Mrs Dickerson 4 times this year in April and May, saying she told her about disturbing visions she had had in August 2021 of harming her children.
She told me that it felt like a devil on her shoulder with self-doubt in the weeks prior to the alleged offending, that she was not a good enough mother, and constantly worried, quote, "Are they going to be safe? What happens to them if something happens to us?"
Dr Hatters-Friedman says Lauren Dickerson told her the visions had popped into her mind and she had no intent to act on them. Auckland residents with flood-wrecked homes won't need to pay rates for the next 12 months. Council has voted to use a miscellaneous remission policy to remit 100% of rates for all properties made uninhabitable by this year's storms. Deputy Mayor Desley Simpson says she was happy to champion relief efforts today for those affected by the floods. A person is in custody following threats made against work and income in Auckland. Police responded to reports a man was making threats at the Pukekohe office this afternoon. A police spokesman says work and income in Queen Street, Papakura, Tobin Street, Pukekohe and Queen Street, Waiuku were locked down as a precaution. A man was found in the Pukekohe area and a replica firearm recovered. In sports news, Kiwisaver will captain the All Blacks against Australia in Saturday's test in Melbourne after Sam Cane was ruled out with a neck injury. Dalton Papali'i places Cane at open side flanker, the only change to the starting lineup that beat the Springboks 2 weeks ago. Cane suffered the injury in that win and it immediately brought back memories of his 2018 neck injury when he worried it may have been a career-ending injury. But coach Ian Foster says the skipper's latest injury is not nearly as bad.
Not serious at all, really. Him and I had a conversation at the start of the week and just felt that he'd benefit from a week of sort of not trying to get back to play, but to make sure we give him as much recovery time as possible. So expect him to be fully available for next week at this stage.
Lock Sam Whitelock and midfielder Anton Leonard-Brown have been named on the bench, having missed the wins over Argentina and South Africa through injury and suspension, respectively. A second-half goal has earned defending champions the United States a 1-1 draw against the Netherlands in their Women's Football World Cup group match in Wellington this afternoon. The match was a repeat of the 2019 final. The Dutch struck first and the US found themselves down at half-time for the first time in a World Cup match since 2011. They levelled quarter of an hour into the second half through co-captain Lindsay Horan, who told Sky TV she never felt the match would slip away from them.
I felt the momentum the whole time. I think the first half we can be a little disappointed in how we played, but I think we fixed things right away, the pressure that we got on and the amount of chances and opportunities that came from it. So proud of the team and their response.
And that's the news.
Big-time footballers on the world stage.
These players who are still new to the World Cup, this is the big moment, and it's going to be really interesting to see who steps up.
Big plans for Trans-Tasman travel.
What we're talking about is making it faster and easier for New Zealanders and Australians to move between our countries. That'll look like less time in queues.
And a big finale for Lizzo in Auckland.
It's about damn time. In a minute, I'ma need a sentimental man or woman.
She points out a man and says, that man waving, put the cameras on him. Thank you so much for coming. And it's none other than Pāti Maōri co-leader, Rawiri Waititi.
The Big Stories Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
That's how I feel right now.
And now the short forecast from Met Service until midnight tomorrow. North Taranaki across to Taupō and Bay of Plenty northwards. Showers clearing to fine south of Hamilton this evening and elsewhere tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, brief showers this evening, then more showers developing tomorrow with hail and thunderstorms possible about the coast in the morning. South Taranaki to Wellington and Wairarapa, including Taihape. Isolated showers becoming widespread for a time tonight or early tomorrow with a period of gale southwesterlies in Wellington and Wairarapa. Snow to 600 metres in Taihape and thunderstorms possible in Wairarapa. Marlborough and Canterbury, isolated showers with snow to 600 metres, clearing to fine tomorrow morning. Gale southwesterlies about Banks Peninsula and the Kaikoura coast easing overnight tonight. Nelson, Bulla and Westland, fine apart from a few showers about coastal Bulla today. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, showers clearing tomorrow morning. And for the Chatham Islands, a few showers. RNZ National, it is coming up to 8 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint with Lisa Owen.
Nā mihi Anna, tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Radical is how the Maori Party describes its own tax policy, and National agrees, but for different reasons. If in power, Te Pāti Maōri will remove GST from all kai. The first $30,000 of income will be tax-free. It will introduce two new top-end tax brackets of 42% and 48% for income over 180 and 300k respectively. There will also be a wealth and ghost house tax. Te Pāti Maōri says its tax policy is transformative and will help restore kindness and economic justice. Ko taku manuhiri anai ko Rawiri Waititi, the co-leader of Te Pāti Maōri, joins us now. Tēnā koe.
Kia ora, Lisa. Kia ora tātou.
Hey, you've called this a radical policy, so has National. So is radical good or a bad thing?
Oh, radical is a good thing. Without radicalism across the world, you wouldn't see very many changes for minorities, for Indigenous peoples, and especially for those who are living in poverty. And so this, we have a broken tax system in this country, which has fueled extreme wealth inequity, and that it's only getting worse. And if we don't come up with with radical transformative tax policy, then we will continue to see the gaps widen between the rich and the poor.
Let's have a look at some of the detail of your policy. GST of kai. All food, doesn't matter what it is.
It is all food. We want is less regulation for people who are struggling to put kai on their tables. We don't want them to be discriminated against when they go to the supermarket. We want to create an Aotearoa hau. What does an Aotearoa hau look like? It looks like how we will treat you on the marae. We will welcome you, we will feed you, we will house you, we will care for you, we will love you. When you come and eat at the marae, we don't say, well, you can eat some of the things on the table. Our thing is giving our people choice. But we want less regulation, less government, more freedom and more dignity for our people.
So it doesn't bother you that it would include everything like takeaways, confectionery, fizz, the whole gamut?
The thing is, what you're talking about are health issues, and we've got the balance of that in a health policy. And so you will see the offset in regards to ensuring that our people have the education around what good kai is. But at this particular time, our people just need to put bread and butter on the table. And the thing is, who's going to sit there and determine what's good and what's bad? And you don't want to discriminate against those who can and cannot. And so this this policy is ensuring that we lift everybody. This is not just about Māori. This is about everybody that's struggling. You've got 2 million people who are under 30,000, who are making under $30,000 per annum. We're talking about beneficiaries. We're talking about superannuants, and you've got 3 million people who make under $60,000 a year, also struggling to put kai on the table. So, this removing GST off kai right now will make a huge difference to those whānau who are absolutely struggling to put kai on the table and feed their families.
So, Rawiri, that 2 million you just cited earning less than $30,000 a year, who does that include? From what age up? Is it working population, 18 plus, or what, 18 years old plus, or how have you worked that out?
That is everybody who is making $30,000 and less. And many of them are superannuants, and many of them are beneficiaries, and those who are on low-paying jobs. And so this is about being kind. This is about giving people integrity in that particular space. So the numbers have been done. They have been checked off by the Parliamentary Library Services, and so we have fact-checked all of those numbers and figures. And this is about ensuring that we can start closing those the wealth inequities that are just getting wider and wider here in Aotearoa.
I understand your aim, but wealthier people are the ones who spend the most on food, right, and meals and going to the supermarket. So cutting GST on food, they'll get the most benefit out of that. So did you look at other ways, or whether this is the most efficient way to put money back into the pockets of low-income households?
Yes, this is about us focusing on those low-income households. And so there are other parts of our policy that looks at a better tax bracket for those who are making more money, and our net wealth tax is absolutely going to be doing that. And so,
okay, tell us about that, because we've got a limited amount of time and I want to get as much detail as possible. So the progressive wealth tax, who would you apply that to, please?
Well, so if you're making 30,000 or less, you get zero tax implications. If you're making over 30,000, so those who are under 60,000 get a 15% tax, have 15% tax, and then right down to those who are making over 300,000, there's a 48% tax. So this is transferring the burden of tax, because GST on kai is a regressive tax, and so what we're trying to do is transfer the wealth tax. Look. Is it a neutral policy, Rawiri? Sorry to interrupt. So I'm saying there, the tax rebate in essence that you're giving with GST off food and 30 grand tax free, and then you're taking these higher tax brackets. Will the government kitty in terms of tax be short, or will the two equations balance each other out? Oh no, absolutely balance each other out. And so those numbers are now. Absolutely, it's neutral. It all works out to ensure that in actual fact the government will make more money on this particular tax policy because of the transfer from the poor to the rich. And so, like I said, at a 48% income for those who are making 300,000 and above, also ghost house tax, and ensuring that there's an increase in company tax. You will know that you need political company to get this across the line. You'll be in a coalition or an agreement or some kind of arrangement. Chris Hipkins today, these are the words out of his mouth. I've set out our bottom lines. If parties want to make wealth tax a bottom line for being part of a government or not being part of a government, then ultimately they'd need to find a governing partner that was willing to go along with that. Your thoughts? Is this a bottom line? Could you go with Labor if they said no wealth tax? Yeah, well, that tells me that Chris Hipkins is quite willing to give up his prime ministership for something where he's not willing to negotiate. And so, there have been independent. So
you'd walk away if he's not going to give you this. You will walk away from him.
There have been independent reviews done by the last three ministers of finance, and we're talking about Dr. Cullen, Bill English, and also Robinson, that have come back and said that there should be a wealth tax and a capital gains tax. They have chosen to ignore that. You've got the Minister of Revenue just resign in the last few days because he didn't agree with the current Prime Minister, cancelling out the possibility of a wealth tax or capital gains tax.
Appreciate your time, Rawiri. We're out of time. Good to talk to you. Thank you for joining us. That was Rauri Waititi, who is the co-leader of Te Pāti Maōri. Let us know your thoughts, 2101 on text. The National Party has attempted to steal Labour's thunder, claiming the party will soon announce a plan to reduce GST on fruit and vegetables. It's an idea the government has previously dismissed, but curiously, the Prime Minister would not confirm or deny the plans today. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Chris Hipkins in Christchurch turning up to speak to media today.
I don't have any announcements to make today, so happy to go straight into questions.
He may not have had an announcement, but National had one on his behalf. Shortly before his comments, Nicola Willis fronted media at Parliament, dishing the dirt on what she says is Labour's big tax promise this election.
Chris Hipkins is set to soon announce a policy, a failed policy from the past, of reducing the GST on fruit and vegetables.
And how does she know who gave her the inside word?
This is information that has come to me that I believe to be true. You may have noticed there's been quite a lot of leaks out of the government lately. If it's not their policy, it's up to them to say that.
But neither the Prime Minister nor Deputy would say that today, keeping the prospect very much alive.
I'm not announcing our tax policy today.
We haven't announced a tax policy yet.
I'm not announcing any tax policies today.
Not ruling it out or ruling it in at this stage.
I'm not going to comment on a hypothetical policy that I haven't announced.
That is a telling shift from just months ago when Labour was quite willing to dismiss the idea. As recently as April, Chris Hipkins was not in favour, speaking here on News Hub's AM show.
Don't expect to see anything in that space between now and the election. I never say never on these things, but it's certainly not something that we're working on at the moment.
The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, has also publicly criticised the policy, warning supermarkets are more likely to benefit than consumers. Here he is on TVNZ a year ago.
GST is a very, very simple system that works well for New Zealand, and once you start getting into removing it from particular products, it becomes complicated. You have to make trade-offs between different things. Is it healthy? Is it unhealthy? And will actually the benefit of that really be passed on to people?
If the Prime Minister doesn't trust his Finance Minister, then how can New Zealanders?
The former Revenue Minister David Parker recently renounced the role in protest over the Prime Minister's decision to rule out a wealth tax or CGT. Asked whether he had quit due to the party's new GST plan, he had little to say.
No.
The policy is one Labour's previously campaigned on back in 2011. It wasn't enough to get it elected then, but it may find more favour now as voters struggle with the eye-watering cost of groceries. A News Hub Reid research poll announced this May found more than 3/4 of those surveyed supported removing GST from food. Tax experts, though, almost to a person, hate the idea, including economist Brad Olson from Infometrics.
Although it's a simplistic idea to remove GST from food, it doesn't actually get to the core of the problem. It's an untargeted and therefore much more expensive approach that gives a lot more support to those on higher incomes than it does on low.
There's also nothing to force supermarkets to pass on the savings, never mind the endless legal wrangling likely over what counts as fresh fruit and veg.
We haven't announced our tax policy yet, so people can speculate all they like.
Speculate they will. Labour has promised to lay out its tax plan, quote, soon. In an election this tight, it may well put popularity ahead of practicality.
It is 18 minutes past 5. Kia amo tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. An open home was held at the house at the centre of an investigation into the disappearance of real estate agent Yanfei Bao days after police appealed for help to find her. The house on Trevor Street in Wigram is now being forensically examined after the Harcourt's real estate agent vanished last Wednesday, and detectives are treating the case as a homicide inquiry. A 52-year-old man has been charged with kidnapping Ms Bao, and police aren't ruling out further charges. Chen Yu reports.
Forensic police are still examining a 3-bedroom house in Trevor Street in Hornby, which was being marketed by Yanfei Bao's employer Harcourt's. Julie Charney, who lives in the street, says an open home was held last Sunday, days after police publicly appealed for help to find the 44-year-old.
I just seen people just going in and doing the usual business, going and having a look at the place, nothing out of the ordinary.
Ms. Charney says she saw police at the house last Thursday. She says officers returned on Sunday when they door knocked and took CCTV footage from a neighbour before guarding the house that night and setting up a tent on Tuesday. Police haven't explained why it took so long to examine the house. Ms. Chani says it's an eerie and horrible feeling to know that police no longer believe Ms. Bao is alive, and her heart goes out to her husband and 9-year-old daughter.
Really devastating for the family. You know, you're meant to go to work and come home. You're not meant to lose your life. It's just happening up the road, because this neighbourhood is very quiet. This sort of stuff doesn't happen, so it's very, very scary to think how close it was to home.
Another woman who lives in Trevor Street, Diana AJ, says she doesn't feel safe leaving her house.
It's very shocking. It's really shocking and scary for us. And I know all the neighbours around us, but now it's like we just don't want to get out the house. Yeah, it's feel very uncomfortable and unsafe now.
Tom Duke also lives in the street. He says he thought the neighbourhood was safe.
Pretty upset that it's happened on our street, obviously. Big disturbance to what's happened, and just seeing it is obviously scary. But just having it so close to home.
Jay Lee, who has lived in Christchurch for more than 20 years, says he feels shocked and sad about what has happened. He says there should be better safety measures for people who have to door knock for their job, like real estate agents or insurance salespeople. He says more surveillance cameras would also help. Mr. Lee's words have been revoiced.
I hope there'll be more cameras installed on the main roads. It'll make investigations easier if any incident happens in the future. It can save some time, instead of just looking here and there. Time is precious for victims, which shouldn't be wasted.
Harcourt's Managing Director Brian Thompson says staff received the news the inquiry had been upgraded to a homicide investigation with heavy hearts. He says the company's thoughts are with Ms. Bao's family, friends and colleagues. Police have been searching the swollen Horsewell River near Green Park using inflatable boats. Detectives are still appealing for the public help in tracking the movements of Ms. Bao's car on Wednesday last week. It's a silver Nissan Dwalas with the registration plate PKT 556.
It's 22 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening, particularly interested in your thoughts on Te Pāti Maōri's tax policy. They would get rid of GST on all food and they will introduce 2 new top tax rates, plus a wealth tax on assets, 5 million plus it is. Oh no, it's 2 million, sorry, 2 million plus. Don't forget you can text us 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time for the headlines now. Ko ana anō tēnei.
Thanks, Lisa. Te Pāti Maōri would remove GST from all food and take tax off the first $30,000 of income if elected. It would also bring in 42% and 48% brackets for income over $180,000 and $300,000 respectively, and tax vacant houses. Te Pāti Maōri co-leader Rawiri Waititi told Checkpoint New Zealand has a broken tax system and it's fuelling extreme inequality. Meanwhile, National is claiming Labour will soon unveil a proposal to cut the 15% GST on fruit and vegetables. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins is not denying the claim, but says people will have to wait for the party's tax announcement. An open home took place at a property at the centre of Yanfei Bao homicide inquiry, days after police appealed for help to find the missing Christchurch real estate agent. The house in Wigram is now under forensic examination, while a 52-year-old man has been charged with kidnapping. The High Court's been told Lauren Dickerson had visions of harming her 3 daughters in the month before they were found dead at their Timaru home in September 2021. A forensic psychiatrist said Mrs. Dickerson told her the images had popped into her mind and she had no intention of acting on them. Mrs. Dickerson denies murder and is pleading insanity and infanticide. And a landmark House of Representatives session in Washington has been hearing of encounters with UFOs. David Grush, an ex-Air Force intelligence officer, hinted that government officials had suppressed information and punished whistleblowers, but said he could not legally elaborate. Those are your headlines, Lisa.
Kia ora. Returning to our top story now and the debate over removing GST off food. Te Pāti Maōri has announced it is a key election promise and Labour is not ruling out having something like it in its tax policy bag. Deloitte GST partner Alan Bulow joins us now. Hi, Alan.
Hi there.
How complicated is this as a policy, removing GST from food?
It's certainly something that can be done, but it would be complicated, and it really depends on the details of how you define what food you're taking it out. Do you take it off all food, or do you just take it off fresh fruit and vegetables? In either cases, there's still going to be some things on the boundary that come through, and whenever you've got a boundary for something like GST, you create tensions, you create definitional issues, and put bluntly, you create a lot of work for people like me, which is not necessarily the best use of resources for the country.
So is it more cost efficient to go for all food, say everything, you're including takeaways, burgers, chips, fizz, everything, get rid of GST on all of that, or is it more efficient to say just going to take it off, for example, fruit and veg?
If you take it off all food, it's really expensive. I mean, the costings from this morning's release were, I think, $3.4 billion, which is an awful lot of money to take it off. And also, if you take it off food, then when the tax working group was looking at this back in 2018, their numbers were showing that higher incomes, decile families get 3 times as much absolute dollar benefit than lower incomes. So it's a very untargeted way to try and get a cash benefit to people if the actual benefit is in fact passed on to the end consumers. Overseas studies have looked at when there have been changes to the GST rules, and they've found that frequently only a small and sometimes relatively small proportion of the savings are actually ultimately passed on to the consumer.
Right, so what would you need to do to ensure that people do get discounted food? I mean, because what you're basically telling me is that GST might be 15%, but if you take GST off food, don't expect your food to be 15% cheaper.
That's exactly it. And you could try and regulate the supermarkets to require them not to pass on the higher costs. But if you're a supermarket that's, say, buying imported food from people that are outside the scope of the New Zealand legislation and they're aware that GST has come off their line of crackers or whatever convenience food it is that's in the supermarket, they might go, well, it used to sell for, $10 plus $1.50 of GST. Well, hey, and we were selling it for $8. We're now going to sell it to the supermarket for $8.50, and the supermarket's going to want to put on its margin. So it's going to be very hard to actually try and do that.
So what are the alternatives? If you are wanting to assist low-income families, make sure that they can put kai on the table. If GST is not the best way to deliver some kind of money back to them, what is it? Is it tax-free income?
I think what you then are looking at is you're looking at what job does GST do? And GST is a tool for collecting money for the government. It's a very blunt tool, it's a very simplistic tool, and before the news when you were quoting Grant Robinson and all of those sorts of ones, they're talking about the fact that it is just a tool for doing this broad range with very few exemptions. So you collect the GST to come through and catch all of the money, and then the government works out how it wants to target assistance using that money.
Really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. That is Alan Bulow, who is Deloitte GST partner there, talking about how complicated or not it is to remove GST from food and different types of food. Two-time defending champions, the USA, have been held to a 1-1 draw by the Netherlands in their FIFA World Cup game in Wellington. It was a rematch of the 2019 final, which the USA won 2-0. However, they didn't have it all their way this afternoon. Barry Guy was at the game. Barry, it sounds like it was a beauty. I caught some of it on the television.
It was, Lisa, yes, and the crowd really enjoyed it also. I must say it's a festive crowd that we're getting at these World Cup games, which I'm thoroughly enjoying compared to some of those rugby tests. Perhaps that can be a bit, as far as the crowd's concerned, a bit duller. But everyone's enjoying themselves, and they certainly did at Wellington Stadium today. Yes, the USA, they showed glimpses of the side that's won 2 World Cups, whereas the Dutch seem to play a sort of a European style where they marked them well, and then they made a break and scored a goal in the first half. The USA continued to try and play their expansive sort of attacking game, and it paid off in the second half when they got that equaliser, and possibly could have gone ahead a bit later in the game as the Dutch started to tire. But a high-quality game, and I couldn't help but think that we're going to see these two teams deep into the tournament, and that compared to half of the other teams I've seen play so far, they're not up to the standard. You might put Spain or Germany in there as well. But that was a high-quality game. The crowd was treated to a very good game of football. And, yes, I think we're looking at some teams that will be contending in a couple of weeks' time.
Barry, I should have actually declared a conflict of interest before I asked you that question because I got the Netherlands in the sweepstake. So there you go,
Well, if there's a second or third prize, you're definitely in the money, I'm going to say.
Well, I'll hold you to it. OK, let's move on to the All Blacks. They've named their team to take on the Wallabies at the MCG on Saturday. Just one change from the side that beat South Africa a fortnight ago. So were you expecting a bit more of a tweak?
I was, actually, but having had discussions with a few other people in the office, it seems that the All Blacks want to wrap up the Bledisloe Cup first, and then they might experiment a little bit more, actually. So the one change is Dalton Papali'i's coming in for Sam Cane, who still has a little bit of a sore neck from the game he played last, and so he's not there. So that's one change. Ardie Savea is now the captain. Still no room for Sam Whitelock, the Crusaders lock. He's in the reserves. Richie Mo'unga remains at first five. They still like Rieko Ioane and Geordie Barrett in the centres and Bowden Barrett at fullback. So I think we can get a good indication there. And also that Frizzell is still on the blind side. That this is, I think, the basis of what we're going to get for the World Cup later this year. Is this is perhaps going to be the top side? No room for Damien McKenzie in the 23, but in the second game against Australia, I think we will see some of the wider, more players coming into that All Black side. Special mention for Hurricanes halfback Cam Roigard. He's in the reserves. He may well get his first cap this weekend. So, yeah, a solid-looking side against the Wallabies, who everyone's discounting, but Eddie Jones is in charge, and the other Wallabies, they're going to, I believe, they're going to fight for this game at the MCG on Saturday night.
Thank you, Barry. And just a footnote, I've heard from the officials of the sweepstake here at RNZ, and apparently there is no prize for third, so I'm now hoping that your predictions regarding the Netherlands are completely wrong.
Go the Netherlands then.
Thank you, Barry. That was Barry Guy with Sport today. 28 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Ko taku hoa e nai ko Kim Moody, who joins us live. Kim, the cost of living climbed 7.2%, according to Stats New Zealand. Interesting in the context of talking about GST on food too.
Kia ora, Lisa. Yes, it is timely, you could say. So we obviously had the annual headline inflation rate last week coming out from Stats NZ. That said that inflation had fallen to 6% for the 3 months ended June. Some new data out today from the same agency, Stats NZ, but what is interesting about their estimate is that it includes mortgage payments and disregards the cost of constructing new housing in its calculations. So today's data showing how the costs increased 7.2%. A lot of that was made up on spending on interest, was the biggest driver of this increase. So between June last year and last month, the average amount of money people were spending on interest payments rose just under 29%. So that is a big chunk of money now going towards those interest payments. Food prices once again lifted, timely again considering what you're talking about today. So most household groups, the amount that they are spending on food increased 13.2%. Fruit and vegetables increased 21.2%. Other things also increased as well. Of course, rent increased 4.8%. So breaking this down into some groups, there's an average household aggregate, but then they do break it down into groups. So beneficiaries, who tend to be, less impacted by the rising interest rates or the rising hiking cycle that we've seen by the Reserve Bank. Their cost of living rose 6.5% on average. For Maori households, that rose by 7%. The highest spending households, they actually saw the biggest jump in their costs, but that is because they do tend to spend more and they do have those higher interest rates to be dealing with. Superannuants, they experienced a lower than average rise, about 6.8%. That is still nearly 7%. That is still very noticeable. Again, that could be due to the interest rates. Some superannuants are more likely to own their own homes. All kind of looking like bad news here, apart from the fact that economists say, inflation does look to have peaked, especially by last week's annual numbers. So hopefully this is the highest we'll see in a bit. But again, we're going to have to wait and see, I'm afraid.
Okay, well, let's have a quick look at this one. Small and medium-sized businesses, they're cautiously optimistic about their future.
Yes, they are, apparently. This is according to a new report by the human resources platform MyHR, that's showing nearly 2/3 of small and medium enterprises, or SMEs, which we call small businesses, they expect their revenue to improve in the next year. Nearly half think business conditions will improve. 38% think it will stay the same. So, not an enormous amount thinking things will be amazing, but a bit of an improvement. So this report was put together using data from more than 1,200 businesses. And MyHR's chief executive says this is a cautiously optimistic picture, just still testing the waters a bit. Again, could be due to the fact that, as we're talking about, inflation might have peaked. This could also be a bit of a tale of two businesses here. Unfortunately, businesses that might have really, really struggled during COVID lockdowns, rising costs, all of these things, they might have actually closed down. And those that, did manage to survive this, perhaps they're feeling a bit optimistic about what might be coming after what has been a really tough 2 years for them.
And shall we take a spin around the markets, please?
Let's. So it's the local top 50 index looking pretty flat today, actually closing at 11,954. New Zealand dollar is currently buying 62.5 US cents, 92 Australian cents and 48.2 pence.
Thank you, Kim. Kim Moody there with Business News. Aucklanders are increasingly putting the wrong stuff in their recycling bins, often resulting in the whole lot going to landfill. The council has found that so-called bin contamination in the city has doubled over the last 3 years to over 20% of total waste. And recycling bins in public spaces are even worse. A staggering 80% of their contents shouldn't be there. The city's bins are also turning up some pretty weird items, ranging from a samurai sword to prosthetic body parts. Reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Marika Habazi went for a ride along with some Auckland Council rubbish collectors to get a closer look.
It's bin day here in Auckland's Greenhithe. In fact, it's a double whammy because it's recycling day too. Ros Millet's responsible for inspecting the recycling bins every morning before the truck arrives. She walks about 20,000 steps a day to check people are putting the right items in, but that's not often the case.
We get nappies, food waste, and in summer that's not nice because then you get maggots. I've had a chainsaw in the bin, a whole chainsaw.
If the bin is contaminated, it gets a red or orange tag to inform the household, and the driver gets an alert not to pick it up. Today's offending bin is overflowing with all sorts of the wrong stuff.
This is just a minor offence, but because they have got food scraps, it is automatically red tagged. It's got wrong plastic. All the things that are wrong with it, we tick. It's also got different languages if people are unsure.
With contamination on the rise, Roz's job is getting more demanding.
I used to have probably about 20 tags in my bin, in my bag that I carry around. Now I'll use that on a street. It's frustrating though. It's normally the same people that are repeat offenders, so yeah.
Once Roz has finished her inspections, rubbish truck driver VJ rumbles along to collect the uncontaminated bins. Today, Checkpoint hitched a ride.
Contamination, just press contamination, non-recyclable, incorrect misrecycled.
Inside, the truck cameras allow him to monitor what is being loaded in, should anything evade Roz's inspections, by hiding at the bottom of the bin.
He says this is something that happens a lot, usually with bags of clothing or pillows sneaking in. If that's the case, he pushes a contamination button, which sends the household's address to council. But by this point, it's too late, and a large part of the truckload is now contaminated. General Manager of Waste Solutions at Auckland Council, Parul Sud, says that has multiple consequences.
The wrong items have to be sent to landfill, so that's one cost. The processing costs much more money, that's another cost. And the last one is your markets that are commodity based. If your product is not good, there is an effect on that as well.
In the last year, they've had more and more strange items put in recycling that simply don't belong there.
Pig's head, that's clearly not recyclable. We've had guns in the mix as well. We've had engine blocks, and who thinks that's recyclable?
Once the bins have been collected, they end up here at the Visi Recycling Centre in Onehunga. Pungent smell and the flock of hungry seagulls are a dead giveaway there are items that shouldn't be here. Around 250 tonnes of recycling get sent back out to landfill from here a day. Recycling bins in public places are processed at a different facility, but their contamination rate is far higher at 80%, which means it mostly can't be recycled at all. The curbside recycling sent to Onehunga gets loaded onto a conveyor belt and then sorted and grouped into different materials. Materials like glass are then sorted. Paper, cans and plastics are then processed into bales. Over 120,000 tonnes of this material goes to market here and overseas. If a resident's bin is red tagged 3 times within 3 months, the council will consider removing their bin altogether. But offenders will receive 2 warning letters and an in-person visit before it comes to this. The council says while the number of confiscated bins is relatively low, if contamination levels don't improve, tougher measures will be enforced.
And that was Louise Tanuth reporting. If you want to see the video version of that story, it is really worth checking out. It is on our webpage. It is 19 minutes away from 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Okay, on the dirty subject of rubbish, we're after your confessions now. So, homai o whakaro, send us your feedback. Are you guilty of putting things in the recycle bin that you shouldn't? I've got a confession to make. Sometimes the dog food cans, Anna, they're quite difficult to wash out. I'm not sure that they're clean enough when I put them in there, because that's what I learnt today. And no tops for milk bottles. Not allowed to.
No, of course you're not. Where have you been?
I know. Well, a lot of people are making these mistakes, so now the time to confess. 2101 on text. Let us know what you're up to. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. We won't reveal your addresses, we promise. Email us at checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And here is the righteous rubbish person, Anna, with the headlines. Ko Anna anō tēnei.
Thanks, Lisa. Te Pāti Maōri co-leader Debbie Ngāri Wapaka says her party would remove GST from all food, not just fruit and vegetables, if elected. The party has today set out what it calls a radical tax policy, which includes higher taxes on wealth, foreign companies, undeveloped land and empty houses. Meanwhile, Nationals claiming Labour is about to unveil an election policy to remove the 15% GST from fruit and vegetables. Labour leader Chris Hipkins has not denied the claim, but he also hasn't confirmed it. Auckland Council has voted to give residents with flood-damaged homes a rates respite for the next 12 months. It applies to all properties that were made uninhabitable by the severe weather earlier this year. The police say the deaths of a father and daughter in West Auckland were violent and senseless after the man responsible was jailed for life. Mikaere Puatachaney was given a minimum non-parole period of 20 and a half years for the murders of Eliza and Jeffrey Trubohovich in July last year. Puatachaney had previously been in a relationship with Eliza, whom he shot dead alongside her father on their front lawn. And a petition calling for a nationwide prostate cancer screening program has been delivered to Parliament, backed by more than 30,000 signatures. Christine Hayward began the petition after the death of her husband Bruce from the disease, aged 66. She says current testing is unfunded, disorganised and inequitable. Those are the headlines, Lisa.
Thank you, Anna. Let's get to some of your feedback, because it's absolutely flooding in on Te Pāti Maōri's tax policy and whether we should get rid of GST on food, or just some food. Lots of opinions on this. This listener says Te Pāti Maōri's GST off food is great, but to include junk foods and drinks is so wrong and would just increase New Zealand's world-leading obesity levels. Peter's got in touch to say targeted help to the poor is the best way to help them. The wealthy don't need this, so it's a no from me. Interesting, our tax expert said wealthier people get 3 times the benefit of removing GST from food than those in low-income houses. This other listener says, is it possible to bring in legislation that puts a limit on the profit margin that can be put on staple foods? It seems like the supermarkets need reining in, not tax. Another, for heaven's sake, check out the USA and Australia, who've been exempting basic food for decades. And just one more. If I have to pay tax at 48%, I will retire and join the poor. That's 48% on every dollar over 300,000K. Would that make you poor? Anyway, keep the feedback coming, 2101, and you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The highly anticipated Women's World Cup clash between the US and the Netherlands in Wellington this afternoon ended with a draw. The deadlock made for a somewhat disappointing end to an exciting match. More than 27,000 people packed in for the lunchtime game, which was a repeat of the 2019 World Cup final. Jemima Houston and cameraman Angus Drever were among the fans today.
Team USA's biggest fans crowded outside the side's hotel this morning, hoping to see their favourite players before the match. Brooke travelled all the way from Ohio to show her support.
My mom and I just decided this was our dream come true. Been a soccer player since I was 4, so we just did it. We're realising our dreams this week, so it's been awesome.
Down on the Wellington waterfront, thousands of Dutch fans were excitedly gathering to march parade style down to the stadium. I met the Queen of Cheese 007, who explained why she was watching the game.
Why? Because I love the Dutch, so that's why.
She is committed to following Team Netherlands throughout the tournament, all the while carrying a 1.5 kilogram wheel of cheese on her head.
Oh, until the Dutch, if they go to the last 16, and they have to go to Australia, and when they got to the quarterfinals, I got to New Zealand back again.
Another Dutch supporter says it's important young girls have the opportunity to watch the Women's World Cup. She says her team sets a great example.
They prove that sports for ladies is super.
Fans marching in another parade for the world champion USA team felt similarly.
We need good role models for our young kids right here, these women, and for us old women too, man. We need role models in general, and these women are it.
USA! USA! USA!
The energy was high and supporters had plenty of predictions about which way the game would go.
I think it's Holland wins by 2-0. Yeah!
We hope.
Yes. We're going to win!
The game was tight, with the Dutch scoring first midway through the first half, with the United States equalising early in the second.
We're in the FIFA fan zone now, in the last few minutes of injury time of the Netherlands and the USA game. It's 1-1, it's tense in here, it's quiet, and it's looking like it's a very close match.
And then the final whistle blew. The 1-1 draw was met with slow claps and a few half-hearted whoops. But fans of the US and the Netherlands didn't feel too let down.
4 of us are supporting the Americans and 1 supporting the Netherlands.
Yeah.
So a draw is good, because if one of them had won, then we probably would have some tears flowing. So we'll take that. We're happy with that.
And I'm happy that they had a draw rather than a lost. Exactly. It was the first game actually that I've really sat through and watched and been so tense, but we didn't lose.
The two sides now each have a win and a draw at the tournament. The quality of today's game shows they're both contenders for the final, where we could see them meet again.
And do check out the video version of that story. We'll put it on our web page. It is 11 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Tributes have been flooding in both here and abroad for the Irish singer-songwriter Sinead O'Connor, who has died at just 56. O'Connor shot to fame for her 1990 cover of Prince's hit Nothing Compares to You, which topped charts around the world. The cause of her death has not been made public, but Sinead O'Connor wasn't just known for her illustrious music career. Her outspoken nature sparked both controversy and adoration. World Watch's Charlie Drever looks back at her life and career.
'Cause nothing compares to you.
Sinead O'Connor's unique vocals, raw emotion and trademark shaved head, flying in the face of beauty standards at the time, sent shockwaves across the music industry. But as the BBC's Mark Savage explains, she was also an outspoken activist.
You know, on her debut album, she has a song called 3 Babies, which is about the 3 children she lost to miscarriage. She also sang about the problems of female genital mutilation. She was always conscious of women's role in the world. She was always conscious of women being put down, and she voiced that in a way that was deeply unusual at the time.
Her most infamous move was ripping the photo of the Pope on SNL in 1992. This sparked global backlash. Copies of her records were destroyed in New York Times Square, and she was booed taking the stage at a tribute for Bob Dylan before leaving and breaking down. But when asked in an interview with the BBC in 2013 if she had any regrets during her life, she had this to say.
I'm very proud that I didn't succumb to... I was too young not to take on board everybody else's opinion, if you like, you know. So that's the only regret I have, is that I spent an awful lot of years thinking I was some dreadful, awful person who didn't deserve to live just because I was different or just because people give you a hard time or whatever. But I don't regret, you know, being me as such, because I think I'm great.
Patricia Given of the Wellington Irish Society says she has been inspired by O'Connor's music since she first heard her in the early 90s.
When she broke onto her screens and radios with Nothing Compares to You, the impact that had on young Irish women was just something else. Like, with her shaved head and her big, beautiful eyes, it stopped everybody in their tracks.
Sinead O'Connor's last performance in New Zealand was at WOMAD in 2015, leading to the iconic moment when she was interrupted mid-performance by a duck, and then had to stop because it was so funny. New Zealand-based Irish musician Jerry Poole says he met Sinead O'Connor in his early 20s while working as a tea-boy in a Dublin recording studio. He says he was struck by her approachable, personable manner.
She just connected with you straight away, found little commonalities, and made you feel very relaxed. You can imagine being a young fella, and her presence was quite intimidating, but she had a way of making you feel very relaxed and important, you know. So it was very sincere and lovely.
Jerry Poole says he continues to be amazed by the diversity and power of her music throughout her more than 30-year career. Wellington-based Irish singer-songwriter Andy Kerr says her openness about her own mental health struggles encouraged people around him to seek help for themselves.
She was a trigger for a lot of people just standing up and saying, I need help. And also standing up for saying this issue isn't right and needs to be talked about. We need to have conversations about different things.
Sinead O'Connor had to overcome many hardships in her life. As a teenager, she was placed in one of the notorious Magdalene laundries, originally set up to incarcerate young girls deemed to be promiscuous. And more recently, she had to overcome an unthinkable tragedy, losing her 17-year-old son to suicide. In a statement today, the Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar says her music was loved around the world and her talent was unmatched and beyond compare.
The answer's here all the time. I love you and hope you love me.
And it is 6 minutes away from 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let's take a complete change in direction. Pies from all over the nation have arrived in Penrose to be judged by pastry professionals. The Bakel's Supreme Pie Awards are now in their 25th year, and the competition has grown to 4,500 pies entered by 500 bakers. That is a lot of pies. We sent reporter Tom Taylor and cameraman Nick Monroe a long, tough gig to get a taste of the action.
You know you love your job when you're still having fun with it after 25 years. Guy Fearless Field has been a judge at the Bakel's Pie Awards since their very inception. On the surface, his philosophy's simple.
When you walk into a shop and you see a pie, it either strikes you as being a nice pie or a bad pie, and if you don't like the look of it, I'm sorry, but people don't buy it.
But he's not earned the moniker fearless by holding back in his judgment.
Every time it's a mixed bag. I mean, you can get a pie that looks absolutely superb, and unfortunately the taste lets it down.
Creamy sauce, celery, broccoli, pumpkin, carrot, sweet corn.
This year, Guy's been assigned to the veggie pies, a category he says gets better every year.
The standard is just right up there, and people are getting more health conscious. So when you make the pastry, you're trying to think of the health conscious part of it as well, the sodium content, all those things come into it.
Meat lovers haven't been forgotten, with categories for steak and cheese, steak and gravy, and bacon and egg, to name a few. Matt chins on the mince pies all day, but he and his fellow judges aren't allowed to tuck in straight away. There's a strict method to follow.
First round, how many pies did we judge? 244 pies. Basically, we just judge the external pastry, bottom and top, and then we go and look at the filling. We don't yet taste it.
With the field whittled down to about 30 pies based on looks, only the most alluring in each category are heated up for the taste test. Welcomed back as the contest's celebrity judge for the second time, Al Brown says the competition keeps lifting its game.
People are really thinking outside the circle, and I tried what they call a Reuben pie, which had corned beef in it, had sauerkraut, it had mustard, etc., and white sauce. And I thought, oh, really? Ate it. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
As the day marches on, we find Judge Tracy Bartlett at the gourmet station. She says it's a tough category to judge, with such a range of flavours coming through.
Butter chicken, there's a really nice seafood one, wasn't there? Shrimp. Pork and watercress, boil up a matariki pie.
That was
with a nice little star on top.
And trying to find some common ground between the three judges is its own challenge.
So we all have different flavours. Like for me, I don't like a really spicy pie. So I'm going to probably put that down a little bit in my scoring. So it balances it out, doesn't it? But we will all get to the best pie, there's no doubt about it.
Just in case, I don my jacket and decide to give this judging thing a try.
Did you guys need any help over here?
Yeah. Just left or right. You can just help us with left or right.
Okay. Left. It's down to the final two pies in the steak and cheese category. Time to put my recent culinary education to the test.
Steak diced, or is there another?
No, that's the only one.
That's the only one. Steak diced and cheese. Maximum baked weight. Can't really judge that by sight. Top pastry flaky.
After a small portion of each pie, I've made up my mind.
Now, what happens if there's a split vote here?
There's only three of us, so they can't see us.
Oh, there's only three of us. Oh, sorry, I thought that was one of you.
Luckily, it doesn't come down to that, with a clear favourite from all four judges. But before I hand in my resume, I just have one more question for Mr. Fearless Field. Is this, in fact, the best job in the world?
Well, it's not too good on your waistline.
The winners of each category and the supreme winner of the Bakel's Pie Awards will be announced on Tuesday.
So worth checking out that video online. We'll put it up on our webpage. What do you reckon makes a good pie, Anna?
Oh, it's all about the pastry, Lisa, for me. You've got to have that crispy, buttery, lots of butter pastry. Don't forget to blow on it too.
Yeah, I know, but I don't know, some of that gelatinous filling, if it's got too much sloppy gravy and other gristly bits, no.
Steak and cheese. You
think?
Can't go past
okay,
a
well,
good
people
steak
can
and
let us
cheese.
know what they love in a pie, 2101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Could you be a professional pie eater?
Oh, totally could. But I did notice that the entire RNZ team was down there. What was that about?
Tom was getting a piece of the action, literally. All right, on rubbish recycling. Interesting, I'm not the only person who didn't know all the rules here. This person says, I didn't know about milk bottle tops either. I think it would be a good time for the council to send a quick list of things that they can go into the recycling to put on the fridge so that we are reminded of what can go in there. But that would just be more waste, wouldn't it? Check on the internet. I should do the same. Another person, Stuart's got in touch, who says, no tops on plastic bottles. What happens to the plastic ring that originally held the top on? I know what you mean, the serrated plastic when you burst them open and the little thing stays around the bottom. Surely it's made of the same plastic as the bottle top. The same can be asked of screw tops on wine bottles as well. Yeah, I don't know what happens to that. Maybe we need to do a Q&A on this. It's very complicated. On the subject of GST, this person, and the Te Pāti Maōri's tax policy, this person says taxing empty homes that have been left empty for a set length of time is a brilliant idea. New Zealand has thousands of them sitting empty.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. Te Pāti Maōri says its radical tax policy will fix a system that is broken and fuels the gap between rich and poor. It wants new taxes on wealth, foreign companies, undeveloped land and vacant houses. The revenue will be used to introduce a tax-free zone for all income up to $30,000 and to scrap GST on all food. Co-leader Rawiri Waititi told Checkpoints it will help end poverty.
This policy is ensuring that we lift everybody. This is not just about Māori, this is about everybody that's struggling. You've got 2 million people who are under 30,000, who are making under $30,000 per annum. Removing GST of kai right now will make a huge difference to those whānau who are absolutely struggling to put kai on the table and feed their families.
Rawiri Waititi says the tax policy is a bottom line in any coalition talks after the election. Labour is not ruling out something similar on GST in its tax policy back, but a tax expert says removing GST from food would provide lawyers with a healthy payday. Deloitte's tax lawyer, Alan Bulow, told Checkpoint that while it can be done, it would be complicated. And he says overseas studies show when changes are made to GST laws, frequently only a small proportion of savings are passed on to consumers. A forensic psychiatrist has told the High Court Lauren Dickerson was horrified by visions she had had of harming her children the month before she killed them. Mrs Dickerson is on trial at the High Court in Christchurch for the murder of her 3 young daughters in their Timaru home in September 2021. She denies the charges, pleading insanity and infanticide. Dr Susan Hatters-Friedman spoke to Mrs Dickerson 4 times this year in April and May and says Mrs Dickerson told her about disturbing visions she had had in August 2021 of harming her children. She says Lauren Dickerson told her the visions had popped into her mind and she had no intent on acting on them. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the door is very much open for New Zealand to engage with the AUKUS Defence Pact. Mr Blinken had bilateral talks with his counterpart, Foreign Affairs Minister Nanaia Mahuta, during his first ever trip to Aotearoa today. Asked about New Zealand's potential membership in AUKUS, Mr Blinken said work on Pillar 2, the defence technology aspect of the pact, is ongoing.
The door is very much open for New Zealand and other partners to engage as they see appropriate going forward. New Zealand is a deeply trusted partner, obviously a Five Eyes member. We've long worked together on the most important national security issues.
Foreign Affairs Minister Nanaia Mahuta says New Zealand officials are exploring the second pillar of AUKUS, but nothing has been agreed to. Auckland residents with flood-wrecked homes won't need to pay rates for the next 12 months. Auckland Council has voted to use a miscellaneous remission policy to remit 100% of rates for all properties that are uninhabitable because of the storms earlier this year. Deputy Mayor Desley Simpson says it was the right thing to do.
Today's decision will give the ratepayers of Auckland that have been affected by the terrible events some understanding that we are empathetic and understanding of their plight.
Desley Simpson says she's happy to champion relief efforts for those affected by the floods. The North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has met the Russian Defence Minister Sergei Shoigu in Pyongyang. The Chinese government delegation is also in North Korea for this week's celebrations, marking the 70th anniversary of the armistice ending the Korean War. Here's the BBC's Jean Mackenzie from Seoul.
The two countries couldn't be marking this moment more differently. Here in South Korea, the mood is sombre. The president has invited veterans from across the world to honour the millions who were killed as fighting engulfed this peninsula. In the north, however, this is cause for celebration. Kim Jong-un has welcomed delegations from Russia and China to take part in his Victory Day events, most likely an extravagant military parade to show off his nuclear arsenal. Mr. Kim has already taken the Russian defence minister to see some of his latest weapons.
Airbnb and the Christchurch City Council are both claiming victory after Environment Court mediation led to an agreement on how short-term letting will be managed in the city. Airbnb says the council's initial proposal would have been one of the most regressive in Australasia, but the council says little has changed other than legalese. The new rules mean homes in residential zones can be rented for up to 60 nights a year without resource consent. The council's head of planning and consents, John Higgins, says he's pleased with the court's ruling.
It's not significantly different to the council decision on the plan change. Ultimately, it was good to get it clarity and the matter satisfactorily concluded.
Airbnb is calling for a national framework on short-term letting. And musicians and members of Aotearoa's Irish community say Sinead O'Connor's music will be playing all over the world today. Wellington Irish Society President Patricia Given says when the singer broke onto the screens and radios with Nothing Compares to You, the impact on young Irish women was like nothing else. Wellington-based Irish singer-songwriter Andy Kerr says O'Connor was the voice of his generation and the first high-profile Irish person to stand up to the Catholic Church. He says he would never forget the moment the singer tore up a picture of the Pope on US television. Sinead O'Connor performed at a packed Bowl of Brooklands, New Plymouth, as part of the 2015 WOMAD Festival. And that's the news.
This Saturday morning, authenticity is highly prized in our counterfeit culture. But what is it really? And why are we so easily fooled? Alice Sherwood on her vastly entertaining book, and Red Mole, the outrageous New Zealand theatre company of the 70s and 80s. Deborah Hunt was a member of the so-called Gang of Three, along with the late Alan Brunton and Sally Rodwell. Cork and Hillaho, join me Saturday morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service until midnight tomorrow. North Taranaki across to Taupo and Bay of Plenty northwards. Showers clearing to fine south of Hamilton this evening and elsewhere tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, brief showers this evening, then more showers developing tomorrow with hail and thunderstorms possible about the coast in the morning. South Taranaki to Wellington and Wairarapa, including Taihape. Isolated showers becoming widespread for a time tonight or early tomorrow with a period of gale southwesterlies in Wellington and Wairarapa. Snow to 600 metres in Taihape and thunderstorms possible in Wairarapa. Marlborough and Canterbury, isolated showers with snow to 600 metres, clearing to fine tomorrow morning. Gale southwesterlies about Banks Peninsula and the Kaikoura coast, easing overnight tonight. Nelson, Buller and Westland, fine apart from a few showers about coastal Buller today. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, showers clearing tomorrow morning, and for the Chatham Islands, a few showers. RNZ National, it is coming up to 6:08 and you're with Checkpoint and Lisa Owen.
Nā mihi Anna, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A passenger train banned from downtown Auckland due to safety concerns after it ran 2 red lights has been given the go-ahead to return to the CBD from August 7th. Waka Kotahi slapped Te Huia, the Hamilton to Auckland train, with a prohibition order after 2 different drivers crashed stop signs on the network in 2 separate incidents. In one case, another commuter train was forced to stop to avoid a potential collision. Since then, Te Huia has been stopping more than 30 k's from the CBD at Papakura. As a condition of re-entry into the city, The Transport Agency had said the train needed to be fitted with a specific, sophisticated electronic control system that monitors the train in real time and can slow it or take control of it. That hasn't happened, but Waka Kotahi, Director of Land Transport, Neil Cook, explains they have reached an agreement on safety measures.
There's a range of additional controls that KiwiRail are going to put in place. The two critical ones here, I would say, are the electronic train protection system that will be commissioned and operating before Te Huia goes on the Auckland Metro network again. So that system, it's not as advanced as some of the other systems around, but it will stop the train if the train passes a red signal. So it's a significant improvement on simply relying on the driver. The second major control that we're glad to see KiwiRail undertaking is more training for those drivers, and in particular better route familiarisation for them before they come back onto the Auckland network.
Okay, so when you place this prohibition order on Te Huia, you said that they would have to install a particular electronic train control system, and the one they're putting in or have put in is not that one. So have you backed off here?
Yes, essentially.
So you're letting them go with a system that is a lower grade than the one that you wanted, that you said was essential for safety?
The prohibition notice condition was put on based on the evidence we had in front of us at the time, which indicated that there were no other controls that could be in place to mitigate the safety risk we were seeing. In the intervening period, so over the past couple of weeks that we've worked with KiwiRail, it's become clear that there were additional controls that could be put in place, including this electronic train protection system, combined with other things such as the additional driver training that's given us the assurance that the service can be operated safely.
Right at the time these incidents occurred, KiwiRail said it was putting in or had already put in one of those systems in Te Huia, but the prohibition order stayed in place.
The electronic train protection system wasn't operating on the service that was running into the Auckland Metro network at the time.
Is it installed now in the train, to be clear?
That would be a question for KiwiRail, Lisa. What I'm saying is that it will be installed and operating prior to the trains commencing travel on the Auckland Metro network again.
So did you overreact with the prohibition order? Were you heavy-handed?
Not at all. Not at all. No, we assessed the evidence that was in front of us and acted accordingly.
The union has said that Te Huia was unfairly singled out and that there are other trains, freights and shunts and the Northern Explorer, who do not have the system you're requiring of Te Huia. Is that right?
I've certainly heard those comments. We reject them. There's no question that we singled out Te Huia for any reason other than the fact that Te Huia was presenting risk in the system that we found unacceptable. We're not ignoring other risks. We're dealing with them in different ways.
Was there any threat that the Te Huia service would be stopped altogether unless you allowed that train to come back into the city?
Oh, no threat of that nature to me, Lisa, not at all. No, we've just worked with KiwiRail over the last 2 weeks to address the issues that we raised. Those issues have been addressed satisfactorily, so we've lifted the prohibition.
And what is the investigation showing in terms of the drivers who went through the red lights?
KiwiRail haven't given us any information on the investigation into particular drivers, and that's not something that I'm concerned about in relation to the service as a whole.
So you were allowing them back in without knowing the results of the investigation into the whys and wherefores with the drivers crashing the red lights?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we don't have any information on specific drivers and what how they may have responded to questions or interviews about what went on.
And that was Neil Cook from Waka Kotahi. The United States top diplomat has been on a flying visit to New Zealand's capital, juggling both sporting and political diplomacy. Antony Blinken sat down with Foreign Affairs Minister Nanaia Mahuta this morning before cheering America's team on at the FIFA Women's World Cup. Our political reporter Annika Smith has more.
A warm welcome for US Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Parliament's forecourt. His first ever trip to the land of the long white cloud. A grip and grin with Prime Minister Chris Hipkins before getting down to business with his New Zealand counterpart Nanaia Mahuta. But not without a few quips about the footy.
There's nothing like a bit of sports diplomacy.
As a lifelong lover of the game, participant as well, although at a rather mediocre level, I'm very much looking forward to cheering on our team.
Today's bilateral discussions covered America's economic engagement in the Pacific region, joint work in Antarctica, security in the Indo-Pacific and ongoing support for Ukraine. Both politicians were also asked about New Zealand's potential membership in AUKUS. Antony Blinken says work on Pillar 2, the defence technology aspect of the pact, is ongoing.
The door is very much open for New Zealand and other partners to engage as they see appropriate going forward. New Zealand is a deeply trusted partner, obviously a Five Eyes member. We've long worked together on the most important national security issues.
Nanaia Mahuta says nothing has been agreed to.
We're exploring what the full extent of Pillar 2 opportunities could look like, and then once that's well understood and articulated by officials and agreed to, that will come back to Cabinet. So nothing's been agreed to, and I want to be really clear about that.
Antony Blinken's motorcade drove past a big sign reading, "We don't want a war with China," en route to the FIFA Women's World Cup. It was guarded by a small group of protesters from the anti-AUKUS coalition. Mark Roach was among half a dozen people there who believe the United States agenda is bigger than football.
We think that the reason for Blinken being in New Zealand is to put more pressure on New Zealand to be involved in their upcoming war on China.
Foreign Affairs Minister Nanaia Mahuta says that wasn't discussed in her sit-down with Mr Blinken today, adding New Zealand's nuclear-free policy is not about to change.
I put on the table the issue of AUKUS. New Zealand maintains its nuclear-free position. We will not change on that.
Antony Blinken's visit wraps up a whirlwind week of hosting high-profile guests in Wellington. Chris Hipkins sending his Australian counterpart off with a bag of capital goodies.
I've got a little gift bag for you, Wellington in a bag.
Coffee?
Yeah, coffee in a can. Bit of peanut butter, bit of chocolate.
Peanut butter.
Anthony Albanese pleased with the treats and Trans-Tasman friendship.
Really, it's been a very successful visit and our fifth meeting in such a short period of time.
Mr Albanese will meet his New Zealand counterpart again, whoever that may be post-election, in Australia next July. There's no set time frame on when officials are to report back to Cabinet about Pillar 2 of AUKUS.
A warning, this next story contains distressing content. A forensic psychiatrist has told the High Court that Lauren Dickerson was horrified by vivid visions of harming her children the month before she killed them. Mrs Dickerson is on trial in Christchurch for the murder of her 3 young daughters in their home in Timaru in 2021. She denies the charges and is instead seeking a verdict of insanity and infanticide. Anna Sargent has been in court.
Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Susan Hatters-Friedman held back tears while describing Mrs. Dickerson's account of her relationship with her daughters.
She said that the children were very intelligent. Leonie loved unicorns and fairies and painting. Carla was sporty and liked to play with a ball. Maya was, quote, a little daddy's girl, stuck on him like Velcro, close quote. She said that she was very active with the children on trampolines or bikes or at a park.
She spoke to Lauren Dickerson 4 times this year in April and May. She says Mrs. Dickerson told her about bold and specific visions she'd had about harming her children that terrified her in August 2021.
She explained that these had, quote, popped into her mind, and she had no intent to act on these visions. She said they felt so real. She told me that it felt like a devil on her shoulder with self-doubt in the weeks prior to the alleged offending, that she was not a good enough mother, and constantly worried, quote, are they going to be safe what happens to them if something happens to us.
Mrs. Dickinson's defence has told the court she was severely disturbed by postpartum depression that never went away. They argue the night Mrs. Dickinson killed her children and tried to take her own life, she was mentally unwell and acted with an altruistic motive. Her defence team says she did it out of love because she didn't want to leave her children without a mother. Dr. Hatters-Friedman says suicide and infanticide are seriously concerning risks of postpartum depression.
Mothers who are suicidal are also at risk for infanticide. Such women may plan a so-called extended suicide with the altruistic belief that their infant is better off in heaven with their mother than remaining alive and motherless in what the depressed mother sees as a cruel and uncaring world.
Dr. Hatters-Friedman says there are cases of altruistic filicide where the parent intends to die but doesn't. The Crown is arguing Mrs. Dickinson acted out of frustration, despair and tiredness and knew her actions were morally wrong. The trial continues.
It is 19 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. To Australia now, where gang battles and bikie feuds are fuelling a spate of deadly shootings across Sydney. Police are scrambling to uncover those responsible as they try to stem the violence. For residents in some parts of the city, gun crime is becoming an all too common occurrence. The ABC's Matt Banford reports.
It's early morning in southwest Sydney and residents like Michael Jones are waking up to another deadly shooting.
Yeah, around 2:14 a.m. in the morning, I heard like 5 gunshots.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And that must seem quite shocking for you. Did it wake you up?
Yeah, it did actually. Yeah, it woke me up. So I was just in my bed, so all I heard was gunshots. And then shortly after, I heard a car like pull away. That's about it. 10 minutes after maybe, I heard like ambulance sirens or police sirens coming down.
Police say a 28-year-old man was shot dead before 2 a.m. in what's a suspected targeted attack. It's the third shooting in a week in this part of the city, and locals are noticing the worrying trend.
No, I heard like not too long ago there was like another shooting in Sydney, so it's pretty concerning that it's starting to happen.
Yesterday, criminal defence lawyer Mahmood Abbas was gunned down in his driveway 15 minutes down the road in Greenacre. Police believe the 30-year-old was also targeted, shot in the leg and torso and rushed to hospital in a serious condition. There's no suggestion Mr Abbas is affiliated with any underworld gang. New South Wales Police Minister Yasmin Catley says authorities are working hard to find those behind the attacks.
I want to assure the public of New South Wales that the New South Wales Government will support the police with anything that they need to investigate this criminal activity.
Mark Maori is a veteran crime reporter for Sydney's Daily Telegraph newspaper. He says many shootings in recent years have been linked to a war between underworld players vying for control of the drug trade. But these latest incidents seem different.
Unlike, the war we've seen in the last couple of years, I think police were able to establish that there were some very common denominators. We knew we had a Hamzy-Alameddine feud. We knew there was some common churros involved. But these latest few, I think, have got police scrambling to find out who is behind them. And I don't think it's just going to be one group like we've seen before.
It's often hard for investigators to unpick the motivations behind each event. They can be high-level hits like last month's shooting in Bondi of convicted cocaine dealer Alan Muradian, or the result of petty tiffs. Mark Maori says almost anything can trigger these violent acts.
It can get personal. We've seen lots of shootings of young men in their 20s and it's over a girl. I know there was one that was a bikie shooting that started over the two wives smashing their trolleys at a supermarket, and then the husbands went at each other. Your natural assumption, and it's normally correct, that it is drugs. Invariably it's drugs that, is what drives most of these shootings.
Duncan McNabb is a crime...
A century ago, 10 million elephants roamed the African continent, but poaching, habitat loss and disease have dramatically cut their numbers. Now less than 500,000 are left, but one country has bucked the trend. Botswana has more elephants than any other, but as their population has risen, so has their conflict with humans. Here's the BBC's John Murphy.
Watching herd after herd of elephants rushing across the dust road, heading for their evening drink at the river, is an exhilarating sight.
I'd say there were close to 150.
Ohitiseng Mosupi, better known as Majita, is our guide. He works for the Ecoexist Trust, which is trying to persuade local people that elephants are not a threat, but an asset.
And you can tell with the speed they move whenever they're going to the river. They are thirsty and they need to go straight and drink some water.
Each year, at least one person is killed, trampled, by an elephant in this part of northern Botswana. With populations of both elephants and humans rising, the pressure on space and resources is growing. Local farmers like Dimbo Kajizizoro use simple fences, but it's not always possible to prevent a crop raid by these giants.
One night I had elephants and I started beating my drum. And then suddenly I had a big splash, like a big boom. It was my water tank. It was pulled down by the elephant.
The consequences of a crop raid by elephants can be devastating. A family's annual supply of vegetables gone in one night. Or in Dimbo's case, his precious water tank. It'll take him years to save up for another one. Despite that, he still recognises that elephants attract tourists to the area, who bring money and create local jobs. Dr. Anna Songhurst is a conservation biologist.
If we're thinking about how human population are growing and the needs of people, then the biggest issue that we face is finding ways for people and elephants to coexist in a landscape.
All life here depends on the water brought by the annual flood, spreading out into the Okavango Delta. But climate change and population growth further upstream, in Angola especially, where most of the delta's water originates, is already having an impact. Hydrologists and conservationists tell us the real concern is major dams and irrigation projects upstream. For Majita, the immediate task is to do whatever possible to ensure elephants and people live together in peace.
A former US intelligence officer claims the US government has known about non-human life for decades and has covered it up. A congressional hearing has also heard from two former Navy pilots who say they've seen unidentified aerial phenomena. The ABC's Angus Randall reports.
It's rare to see queues to enter a US congressional committee hearing, but when allegations of a UFO cover-up are being thrown around, the crowd builds up. Pat Dolan calls himself a UFO enthusiast.
I mean, there's two big questions in this world. What happens when we die and are we alone? And the Pentagon's talking about one of them right now, so it's interesting as hell.
Republican Congressman Tim Burchett burst the UFO bubble early on.
We're not bringing little green men or flying saucers into the hearing. Sorry to disappoint about half y'all. We're just going to get to the facts. We're going to uncover the cover-up.
Two former Navy fighter pilots and a former intelligence officer have been testifying to Congress's House Oversight and Accountability Committee. Usually, a government would dismiss claims of what it calls unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAP. But these reports are coming from trusted servicemen speaking under oath. In 2014, former US Navy Lieutenant Ryan Graves was stationed at Virginia Beach, south of Washington, D.C., when pilots started reporting objects they couldn't explain.
The object, described as a dark grey or a black cube inside of a clear sphere, came within 50 feet of the lead aircraft and was estimated to be 5 to 15 feet in diameter. The mission commander terminated the flight immediately and returned to base. Our squadron submitted a safety report, but there was no official acknowledgement of the incident and no further mechanism to report the sightings.
He says pilots are discouraged from reporting UAP.
UAP are in our airspace, but they are grossly underreported. These sightings are not rare or isolated, they are routine. Military aircrew and commercial pilots, trained observers whose lives depend on accurate identification, are frequently witnessing these phenomena. The stigma attached to UAP is real and powerful and challenges national security.
Former military intelligence officer Major David Grush has gone a step further. He was asked 4 years ago to identify all highly classified government programs on UAP, and he says he uncovered a high-tech conspiracy. He's being questioned here by Republican Congressman Tim Burchett.
I was informed in the course of my official duties of a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program, to which I was denied access to those additional read-ons when I requested it.
Has the U.S. government become aware of actual evidence of extraterrestrial, otherwise unexplained forms of intelligence? And if so, when do you think this first occurred?
I like to use the term non-human. I don't like to denote origin. Keeps the aperture open, both scientifically. Right. Certainly, like I've discussed publicly previously, 1930s.
Professor Stephen Tingay is from the International Centre for Radio Astronomy Research at Curtin University in Perth. He says the testimony fails to add anything new.
In this whole discussion, unless you can come with pretty concrete evidence that is very, very convincing, the conclusion that aliens exist, let alone aliens have visited the Earth and crashed and left debris, that's such an amazing conclusion that to advance any sort of discussion, you really need to come with equally amazing evidence.
The Pentagon has denied all claims of a cover-up.
Alrighty, that's about all we've got time for this evening. But before we go, so much feedback and so many questions about recycling, the dirty business of recycling and etiquette and the ins and outs of what should be in the bin and what should not. We've decided to phone a friend in essence. We're going to have an expert on recycling in the studio tomorrow. If you have questions or you want clarifications or you got some confessions, you can email us, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We will try and get you the answers tomorrow. Last word goes to this person on pies. A good mince pie is the best. You can drink it while you drive under controlled conditions, of course, they say. And tune in tomorrow, ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō from 5 a.m. First up, it is never too early for ice cream, and dill and mustard apparently is a real flavour. First up gets the scoop from the head judge of the Ice Cream and Gelato Awards. That is going to be tasty. Don't forget, 5 a.m. tomorrow. We'll catch you a little later in the day.
Now to the 6:30 news headlines. Te Pāti Maōri says its radical tax policy would help end poverty. It wants wealth taxes to help take incomes up to $30,000 out of taxation and to scrap the 15% GST on all food. Lauren Dickerson had visions of harming her 3 daughters in the month before they were found dead, the High Court in Christchurch has heard. Mrs Dickerson denies murder at their Timaru home in September 2021 and is pleading insanity and infanticide. US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken says he's had a very successful first visit to New Zealand and the door is very much open for the country to engage with the AUKUS Defence Pact. And a passenger train banned from downtown Auckland after running 2 red lights can return from August the 7th. Te Huia has been having to stop at Papakura, more than 30 kilometres from the city. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Tomorrow on Afternoons with Jesse Mulligan on New Zealand Live, it's a high-energy Wellington 6-piece who definitely have the best band name we've come across in a while. They are Tahini Bikini. And Nicola Tuki with the Critter of the Week. Chances are you've come across it before if you spend time in the bush. It's a tangly, twisty black vine that seems to tie the forest up in knots. Plus, Julie Busso with a steamed pudding recipe. That's on Afternoons from 1 p.m. tomorrow here on RNZ National.
You're with Trending Now, and on the detail tonight, the wisdom or not of letting young people dip into retirement savings. Nationals plan to let under 30-year-olds tap into their Kiwisaver to pay a bond for their rental accommodation has been met with mixed reactions. It's their own money, so why shouldn't hard-up students be allowed to use their Kiwisaver funds to help with flatting costs?
Kiwisaver, the best way to not spend your retirement nest egg.
New Zealanders are living longer, and it's so important that they have their income living as long as they do. And it's a great way to save on a regular basis over a long period of time.
But now,
average rent prices have hit a new unwanted record, jumping to $610 per week.
The Trade Me figures reveal a concerning trend that puts even more pressure on families trying to make ends meet.
And the National Party may be giving young people a lifeline.
We're going to let people aged under 30 use their Kiwisaver balance to pay for their bond for accommodation.
It's just another example of the National Party raiding Kiwisaver all of the time.
How can it do anything but drive greater inequality with regard to that wealth transfer from literal retirement savings into the pockets of landlords?
But many students love it.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, I imagine it could be pretty helpful.
Yeah, it would make a lot of sense.
Kia ora, I'm Tom Kitchen, and today on The Detail, what should Kiwisaver actually be used for? Is letting people get bond money out of it the right thing to do? And should we be tinkering with it at all? This is what students think.
You can't really buy a house at the moment, and if you were using your Kiwisaver to do that, you'd have to be saving for a long, long time. So I imagine if people could use it sooner, it would be a bit more helpful.
Is it pretty hard to save for a bond?
I guess it depends on your living situation beforehand. If you have the privilege of living at home and not paying a lot of rent, I imagine you can save a bit of money. But as studying, when you study, it's a bit hard to save a few grand for a bond. It can be quite difficult, and you kind of have to only do it over summer, which can be a bit of a drag.
I mean, I feel like it's a good idea if it had limits.
What do you mean limits?
Like, as in how many bonds you can take out within a certain amount of time, Otherwise, I feel like if you're moving around rentals, then you could kind of, use all your Kiwisaver.
One of the biggest reasons why people aren't able to afford apartments and stuff is because they usually ask for rent. I think it's the first 2 weeks of rent and then a $2,000 bond depending on the area you're living in, or it's just depending on the area as well as the type of housing you're kind of having, whether it's an apartment or it's an actual house, studio, and bond plus the 2 first weeks of rent is also really expensive. So yeah, it would make a lot of sense.
I think with the current market, I think it is a bit necessary. I think interest rates are too high at the moment, so I think being able to take out a few thousand is actually really helpful to some people, especially because I have firsthand heard and seen people say they have to leave where they live because they can't afford it anymore.
If people have enough in their Kiwisaver, I guess that would be beneficial.
Why is that?
If they need a house, they need somewhere to live.
There's an idea floating around at the moment that you can get some of it out for a bond if you needed it for a rental.
Yeah.
Would that help you?